Today we're going to begin lesson 5.4, which is solving compound inequalities. A compound inequality is when two inequalities are joined together with the use of the words and or the word or. This standard is also the same standard as lesson 1 through 4, which covers solving linear equations and inequalities. However, our focus is more on the inequalities. What we're going to look at first is when we use the word and. When we use the word and, we have to be careful with our two inequalities. We basically have two separate inequalities that can be combined. Now, when we learned about how to graph an inequality in lesson 1, we learned that when x is greater than -4, what we would do is we would put an open circle at -4, and our arrow would show numbers that are bigger than -4, such as -2, -1, 0, and further to the right. Our second inequality shows that x is less than or equal to. So because this one is also equal to, we need to color in our circle at 2, and then our arrow needs to cover numbers that are less than 2, such as 1, 0, -1, and so on. Because this is a compound inequality, putting two inequalities together, basically what we're going to do is we're going to take our pictures from the first inequality and the second, and we're going to merge it together. What that means is we're first going to show a closed circle at 2, like we see in the second inequality. We're going to have an open circle at -4, like we see in the first inequality, and my arrow from 2 is going to the left, my arrow from -4 is going to the right. So basically, those two arrows are going to merge together, and it's just going to be a straight line. So you won't even have arrows, you will just have a line connecting those two circles. What this tells us is that x can be anything bigger than -4, and it can also be anything including 2 or less than 2. So within that range of -4 to 2, not being -4, but it could be 2. What we need to remember is that both inequalities are pointing in the same direction, which connects the two. We can also have these inequalities written as two separate inequalities, like we see in the example first inequality, second inequality. However, we can combine them together to make them this combined inequality. You could also write them as two separate inequalities and then just connect them by using the word and. When you're graphing, because those two arrows would run into each other, you are connecting the two circles and then removing the arrows. Now, if we take a look at another example, our first inequality says that x is bigger than or equal to 4. So I would have a closed circle at 4, arrow to the right to show numbers that are bigger. My second inequality would be at x is less than 7. It cannot be 7, but it can be anything less than. So when I combine those together, I have an open circle at 7, I have a closed circle at 4, and that 4 is colored in. Because it's one large inequality, an and inequality, I'm connecting the two circles. Notice once they're combined, there is no longer an arrow. We can also combine inequalities by the use of the word or. If our first inequality is x is bigger than or equal to 0, I'm going to have a closed circle at 0, and my arrow is going to cover numbers that are larger than 0, such as 1, 2, and 3. My second inequality is x is less than -1, so I would have an open circle at -1, and my arrow covers numbers that are less than 1. Now, if you think about combining these two, we know that we have an open circle at -1, but we have a closed circle colored in at 0. My arrow from 0 is pointing to the right, but my arrow from -1 is pointing to the left. So these actually show arrows going in opposite directions. The circles do not connect, so you're still going to keep the arrows. In this next example, the first inequality is x is less than 0. So we have an open circle at 0. Arrow shows numbers that are less than. Our second inequality is x is greater than or equal to 2. So we have a closed circle at positive 2, and my arrow shows numbers that are bigger than or equal to 2. When I combine these two, I basically take both graphs and I put them on the same number line so that when I do that, I can see both inequalities together, and you can see again how they are moving in opposite directions. In this, you can't write it as one big inequality. You still write it as two separate inequalities, but in between those two inequalities, you use the word or. All right, we're ready for our first Keymaster clue here. Our first clue in this lesson is this person grew up in Newton, Iowa. This person coaches boys basketball. This person is a movie bust, and this person has a Boston Terrier named Zeke. So please make sure you find out who this person is, and you continue to collect the clues that each person gives you. If you are unsure of what to do with those clues yet, please just come to me with those clues, and I will explain to you what you're going to use those clues for and how